The American frontier, also popularly known as the Wild West, encompasses the history and culture associated with the American expansion in mainland North America that began with European colonial settlements in the early 17th century and ended with the admission of the last few contiguous Western territories as states in 1912. This era of migration and settlement was particularly encouraged by President Thomas Jefferson following the Louisiana Purchase, giving rise to the expansionist attitude known as Manifest Destiny. The legends, historical events, and folklore of the American frontier have embedded themselves into United States culture so much so that the Old West and the Western genre of media has become one of the defining periods of American national identity. The archetypical Old West period is often cited by historians to have occurred between the end of the American Civil War in 1865 and the 1890 U.S. Census. A period known as the Western Civil War of Incorporation lasted from the 1850s to 1919. This period included historical events synonymous with the archetypical Wild West, such as violent conflict arising from encroaching settlement into frontier land, the removal and assimilation of natives, consolidation of property to large corporations and government, vigilantism, and the attempted enforcement of laws upon outlaws. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Thomas Jefferson thought of himself as a man of the frontier and was keenly interested in expanding and exploring the West. Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the size of the nation at the cost of $15 million. Federalists opposed the expansion, but Jeffersonians hailed the opportunity to create millions of new farms to expand the domain of land-owning yeomen. The ownership would strengthen the ideal Republican society, based on agriculture, not commerce, governed lightly, and promoting self-reliance and virtue, as well as form the political base for Jeffersonian democracy. Manifest destiny was the belief that the United States was preordained to expand from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. The term was coined in the 1840s by a popular magazine which editorialized the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. As the nation grew, manifest destiny became a rallying cry for expansionists in the Democratic Party. In the 1840s, the Tyler and Polk administrations successfully promoted this nationalistic doctrine. However, the Whig Party, which represented business and financial interests, stood opposed to manifest destiny. Whig leaders such as Henry Clay and Abraham Lincoln called for deepening the society through modernization and urbanization instead of simple horizontal expansion. Starting with the annexation of Texas, the expansionists got the upper hand. John Quincy Adams, an anti-slavery Whig, felt the Texas annexation in 1845 to be the heaviest calamity that ever befell myself and my country. Settlers Move Westward were the emigrant guidebooks of the 1840s, featuring route information supplied by the fur traders and the Fremont expeditions, and promising fertile farmland beyond the Rockies. The Oregon Trail. To get to the rich new lands of the West Coast, there were three options. Some sailed around the southern tip of South America during a 6-month voyage. Some took the treacherous journey across the Panama Isthmus, but 400,000 others walked there on an overland route of more than 2,000 miles. They moved in large groups under an experienced wagon master, bringing their clothing, farm supplies, weapons, and animals. These wagon trains followed major rivers, crossed prairies and mountains, and typically ended in Oregon and California. Pioneers generally attempted to complete the journey during a single warm season, usually for 6 months. By 1836, when the first migrant wagon train was organized in Independence, Missouri, a wagon trail had been cleared to Fort Hall, Idaho. Trails were cleared further and further west, eventually reaching the Willamette Valley in Oregon. This network of wagon trails leading to the Pacific Northwest was later called the Oregon Trail. Not all immigrants made it to their destination. The dangers of the overland route were numerous. One particularly well-known example of the treacherous nature of the journey is the story of the ill-fated Donner Party, which became trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains during the winter of 1846. Half of the 90 people traveling with the group died from starvation and exposure, and some resorted to cannibalism to survive. There were also frequent attacks from bandits and highwaymen, such as the infamous Harp brothers, who patrolled the frontier routes and targeted migrant groups. In enormous popular attention was focused on the western United States in the second half of the 19th century. Such media typically exaggerated the romance, anarchy, and chaotic violence of the period for greater dramatic effect. This inspired the Western genre of film, along with television shows, novels, comic books, and video games. As defined by Hine and Farragher, frontier history tells the story of the creation and defense of communities, the use of the land, the development of crops and hotels, and the formation of states. They explain it is a tale of conquest, but also one of survival, persistence, and the merging of peoples and cultures that gave birth and continuing life to America. Central to the myth and the reality of the West is the American cowboy. In actuality, the life of a cowboy was a hard one and revolved around 2 annual roundups, spring and fall, the subsequent drives to market, and the time off in the cattle town spending their hard-earned money on food, clothing, firearms, gambling, and prostitution. During winter, many cowboys hired themselves out to ranches near the cattle towns, where they repaired and maintained equipment and buildings. Working the cattle was not just a routine job but also a lifestyle that exulted in the freedom of the wide, unsettled outdoors on horseback. Long drives hired one cowboy for about 250 head of cattle. Often, hired cowboys were trained and knowledgeable in their trade such as herding, ranching, and protecting cattle. To protect their herd from wild animals, hostile natives, and rustlers, cowboys carried with them their iconic weaponry such as the Bowie knife, lasso, bullwhip, revolvers, rifles, and shotguns. Treaties with foreign nations and native tribes, political compromise, military conquest, the establishment of law and order, the building of farms, ranches, and towns, the marking of trails and digging of mines, and the pulling in of great migrations of Europeans, the United States expanded from coast to coast, fulfilling the ideology of manifest destiny. In his Frontier Thesis, 1893, Turner theorized that the frontier was a process that transformed Europeans into a new people, the Americans, whose values focused on equality, democracy, and optimism, as well as individualism and self-reliance.